Hey guys, this is Miss Arlequin, and in this video we're going to be working on the introduction to our performance-based task essay. So we've talked many times about the structure of an essay and how I really like to compare the structure of an essay to an hourglass. The introduction, which is what we're focusing on today, is the top part of the hourglass, and just like the hourglass, as the introduction goes on, it starts to get thinner or narrower. And it's the same thing with your introduction. We're going to start with our engaging lead to hook the reader. We're going to have some connection sentences that give background information. And then we're going to end with our thesis statement.
All right, so what should an introductory paragraph do? Well, in general, an introduction has three main purposes. It should get your reader's attention and interest so that they want to read your writing. It should identify the specific topic of your writing. So by the time your reader gets to the end of that first paragraph, they know specifically what the rest of the essay is going to be about. And you want to begin with a general introduction to your overall topic. You want to connect the general introduction to the more focused thesis or the point of the essay.
So the first sentence or sentences of your essay should always be the engaging lead, which is also called by many people the hook. It's called the hook because it is supposed to hook your reader in, kind of drag them into your essay, make them want to keep reading. So there's a lot of different strategies for hooking your reader. You can start with an open-ended question. You could begin with a quote. Usually what works best is to choose a quote from a famous person that relates to your topic. You can start with an imaginative scenario where you ask your reader to imagine themselves in the character's shoes. You can start with an interesting fact. This is really good for informative essays, particularly things related to history or science. Or you could write general statements about your topic, your basic thoughts and feelings about it, how others feel or think about the topic, and then slowly start to get more specific. So if I was going to write about a love story and the theme of that particular text, I might start out by just writing about love in general, what it is, how people feel about it. And then that'll actually introduce into the specific characters who are in love in the text I'm writing about. These are just some examples of leads. You can find a lot more examples in the Google Drive Student Resource folder, or even just by doing a Google search for hooks or engaging leads, specifically writing hooks or writing leads.
To begin your lead, the first thing you should think about is what's your essay really going to be about. So you want to try to hone in on the specific topics of your essay. Those specific topics would obviously include the book title and the author, but it should also include what you're going to be writing about that particular text. So it might end up being theme or character traits or literary techniques or perspective. So if I was going to be writing a literary essay about the Telltale Heart, my specific topics would be Telltale Heart, Edgar Allan Poe. I might even include horror, since it's a horror genre story. And the fact that it is very strongly about an unreliable narrator. Those might be some specific topics that I could kind of use as my hook. Now, today we're going to focus on using the question and answer lead because it is one of the most well-known and honestly one of the easiest leads or hooks to use. So again, let's say I'm writing about the Telltale Heart and my specific task is to analyze the character of the narrator. So again, my specific topics are the title of the story. I'm focusing on the narrator. So I have to pick two character traits. I'm going to focus first on unreliable, and then I'm also going to talk about how he's calculated. So if I'm going to use those two character traits, I'm going to use these specific topics. What kind of question and answer leads could I use for this essay? I could start off with a question that relates to a person being unreliable or calculating. And then I also can think about what I eventually want my reader to know. Like, what am I going to be informing him about in the essay? What kind of prior knowledge or opinions do I want the reader of my essay to hold? And then I can use that to make a question that will help lead them into the specific topic that I'll be writing about. All right, so I can start off with a question like, how would you know if someone was telling you the truth? Because that is something that goes on in the story. The police have to know whether or not the narrator is being truthful. Have you ever made a plan for revenge? Did you make sure you considered every possibility when making your plans? Were they foolproof? So that would be related to how the narrator is very calculated. He made very specific plans for murdering the old man. Or I could do, is there any such thing as a perfect crime? Because again, the narrator is trying to commit a perfect crime where he will not be caught. All right, so now it's time to apply what you've learned so far. Use the question and answer strategy for your engaging lead, or as a challenge, if you feel like you are really into another type of engaging lead, or you want to just try to challenge yourself and go with a more difficult one, you can. Remember that the student resource folder in Google Drive has engaging lead strategies and many examples that you can use for support. I would recommend that you go immediately into Google Drive to type the lead, or if you want to just do it on loose leaf paper first and then type it up. So pause the video now, work on your engaging lead, and then when you're ready to move on to the next part of your intro, press play. Now we're going to work on the middle part of our introduction. These are the sentences that connect your lead to your thesis, and you do so by introducing the more specific topics of your essay. And by more specific topics, we're really talking about the text title, the author, and possibly even the genre. So this is the part where you're giving a little more background information to your reader. For example, if the reader of your essay has never read the text, but they're going to be reading your essay where you're analyzing that text, they could get a little lost. So these connection sentences are an opportunity for you to give them that background they might need. So it would be appropriate to write a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the story, just so that your essay makes more sense to them. They have a context.
So when you're connecting your lead to your thesis, you want to be more specific. Remember, the hourglass is getting a little more narrow as we go down the introductory paragraph. You want to avoid saying my essay is about. That is not appropriate for formal writing. This is something that students do when they're first learning to write essays. I kind of think of a sentence like this as like the training wheel when you're learning to ride a bike. Now that we're older and we've written essays for a few years now in school, we should not need to use this phrase. And again, you're going to start connecting your general introduction to the more specific points you're writing about. Now for my sample essay, the specific topics are the title of the story and the theme I'm writing about, and for our performance task, our other specific topic is the writing strategies that the author uses. Now there's a couple of ways that we can write these context sentences. So there are 3 strategies. The first one is you can write a sentence where you give background on the author you are writing about. And what you're basically doing is you're mentioning the author's name, and you're mentioning a fact about them as a writer. So the types of stories they write would usually be a good connecting sentence. Langston Hughes, an African-American poet, often writes poems about the struggles African-Americans go through. And so if I'm writing about one of his specific poems that is about an African-American experience and a struggle, this would be a slow introduction to that specific text. So right here, you have a sentence frame that you can use whenever you want to use this strategy for your connecting sentence. Blank is an author who writes stories. This part can change depending on what you're writing about. For example, I was writing about poems, so I said poems instead of stories. If I was writing about a nonfiction author, then it might be a different genre. And here you say what they usually write it about. This is a perfect strategy when you're writing about multiple texts from the same author. And clearly, this is only a strategy you can use if you happen to know a lot about your author. For example, I don't really know a lot about John Collier, so I can't really write about the types of stories he writes. So for my essay, I'm not going to choose this strategy. A second strategy is you can introduce the specific story you're going to be writing about. And this is a perfect strategy for when you're writing about one text only. You mention the author, the title, and you give a brief summary of what the story is about. In Langston Hughes' poem Harlem, the speaker describes his feelings on giving up on your dreams. A brief little gist of what that poem is about. Once again, this is the sentence frame that you could use whenever you wanted to apply this particular connection strategy. And the third strategy is introducing just in a more general way, not the specific story, not the specific author, but just saying that you're going to be talking about stories or poems or articles or texts. So you're introducing that this is a literary essay. And so an example would be, there are many texts that deal with the theme of dreams. And then my second sentence, which is still part of my connection, would be me mentioning Langston Hughes and Harlem. And I actually could probably even make this my thesis. So here you have on the right side the sentence frame that you could use if you wanted to apply this strategy. And this is a perfect strategy to use when you're writing about more than one author or more than one type of text.
All right, so it's time to once again pause the video so you can work on your own introduction. You're now ready to write the middle sentences of your intro, the connection sentences. Choose one of the connecting strategies to write the next few sentences of your intro paragraph with.
All right, so a thesis statement, as we said, is your claim. It is a concise or brief sentence or two that states what the essay is about. It gives your essay direction. It is conventionally or usually placed at the end of the introductory paragraph, and it's basically your roadmap as the writer for what you're going to prove in your body paragraphs. So again, your thesis is your claim, and I'm stating this again because it is so important. Your thesis is what you are going to be working to prove in your body paragraphs. So all text evidence, all explanations, everything in your writing your body, its job is to prove that your thesis statement is true. If you add anything to your essay that does not help prove your thesis, it doesn't belong there. Now, a good thesis statement is usually going to be one sentence, although I did mention earlier that it could be as many as two. It really depends on the assignment. Stronger thesis statements are ones that you can put into one brief or concise statement. It should be a statement and not a question. Your readers should be able to tell when they read the thesis what the subject of your paper is. However, it shouldn't just be a sentence that just says the subject. It needs to take a stand. It needs to express an opinion or a claim. If it is just identifying a subject, it's going to be a weak thesis. All right, so again, a strong thesis is one that is going to make a claim. It should not be too broad. So just saying this essay is about winter is a little bit too general or too broad to be an effective thesis. It shouldn't be too narrow. So it shouldn't be like a detail from the story, and it shouldn't be too vague. It really has to be something that reflects what the task is asking of you and something that makes a strong claim. On the screen, you have a sentence frame that for most literary essays, you're going to find effective in helping you kind of construct a thesis. It's always a good idea if you haven't earlier in the paragraph mentioned the text title and even the author to start your thesis with that. So let's say I was writing this essay about the chaser. I would start my thesis by saying the chaser. And then you want to have after the title a strong verb that kind of expresses what the story is doing, what you're claiming the story does. So teaching readers would be a good strong verb for an essay that was asking me to write about the theme of a story. And then you want to be a little bit more specific, so you kind of want to end your thesis with your actual point. So if I'm trying to say that the chaser is teaching readers, well, what does it teach readers? What exactly am I claiming the theme is? That's going to be my thesis statement. Now, teaching readers is only an effective verb if I am writing about a theme. However, that is not the only types of essays we write. So on the screen, you have some examples of other verbs that might be useful when writing a thesis. You really need to choose the type of verb that is going to best fit what the assignment is asking of you. All right, so a strategy I like to use for writing a thesis is to take the essay prompt and to basically rephrase it so that it's my thesis statement. Now, if I get an essay prompt or assignment that's a question, well, then this is really easy. This is the same thing I do every time I write race paragraphs. I take the question and I restate and answer it as my topic sentence when I'm doing a short response, Well, your thesis, in a way, is the topic sentence for your whole essay. So just restate and answer the question, and that's your thesis. So an example would be if I had to write an essay about the chaser. How does John Collier develop the conflict of the chaser? I'm going to restate and answer that question. That's going to be my thesis. In The Chaser, John Collier uses my strong verb, dramatic irony, that's my answer, to develop the conflict. Now, you can also take the essay prompt, even if it's not a question, and use it to write your thesis. Basically, if a prompt is given to you, you can kind of rework it into a question. All right, so let's say I had this task in front of me. Write an essay in which you explain the use of irony in one of the unit texts. Describe the effect the use of irony has on the overall text. So if I wanted to take this prompt, and what is it basically asking of me? It wants me to explain the use of irony. I'm going to turn that into a question. If I'm going to explain an author's use of irony, is it asking me what? Is it asking me where, when? Is it asking me why or how? Well, I really need to say how the author is using irony. And so that's going to become my guiding question. How does the author use irony in the text? And now I can take that question and answer it, restate and answer it as my thesis. In The Chaser, John Collier uses irony to develop the theme that you should be careful what you wish for. All right, so let's look at an example of some poor versus effective thesis statements. John Collier uses irony is not a very strong thesis. It's not specific enough. How does he use irony? If I can add that how, I'm going to have a much more effective thesis, like the one on the right. John Collier uses irony to develop his theme. That's how he uses it. Saying in this essay, no, we never say in this essay. You're stating the obvious. Your readers should know that they are reading an essay. And then I am going to prove. We never want to use first person pronouns in an essay. So in this essay, I'm going to prove that Baum uses descriptive language is a weak thesis. But I can rewrite that using stronger language without calling it an essay directly and without using the pronoun I. In the excerpt from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Baum uses descriptive language to develop his perspective of the city. Says the same thing, but in a much stronger way. All right, so now it's time to finish your introduction. Now that we've gone over all three parts, go into the draft that you've been writing, add your thesis statement. Then it's always a good idea for you to read the entire paragraph as one piece. Make sure that every sentence is flowing into the next sentence, that there's no abrupt transition from one part of your introduction to the other. You might want to add a couple of sentences or some transition words if that is a problem. Make sure that you have it typed up in your Google Drive document, which should be attached to Google Classroom, and I will be looking over the introductions.